I stood at the edge of my property line, staring at what looked like a five-star resort cabin rising from the middle of my untouched timberland in rural Washington state, and felt my blood pressure spike to levels that probably required medical attention. The structure was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound deck, and what appeared to be a stone chimney that must have cost more than my truck. The problem? I never authorized anyone to build a single thing on my land. My name is Trevor Xander, and I had inherited 200 acres of pristine Douglas fir and western red cedar forest outside of Enumclaw, Washington, from my grandfather 3 years ago. The land was my retirement plan, my sanctuary, and most importantly, it was mine. All of it. Every single tree, every moss-covered rock, every deer trail winding through the undergrowth. I lived in a modest house on the eastern edge of the property, where the forest met a small clearing. The rest of it remained wild and untouched, exactly how Grandpa had wanted it. The whole nightmare started 6 months ago when a new housing development called Pine Summit Estates popped up on the adjacent property. Some California investment company bought the land and carved it into 40 lots, each with a cookie-cutter McMansion and a postage stamp yard. Within weeks, the Pine Summit Estates Homeowners Association was born, and with it came the usual suspects, overzealous board members with too much time and too little common sense. I first met Brenda Carmichael, the HOA president, when she knocked on my door on a Tuesday morning in November. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA president. Mid-50s, blonde highlights that looked like they cost more than my monthly grocery bill, yoga pants despite clearly never having done yoga, and that particular smile that people use when they are about to ask you for something unreasonable. "Hello there, you must be Trevor," she said, extending a hand with perfectly manicured nails. "I'm Brenda, the president of the Pine Summit Estates HOA. I wanted to introduce myself and welcome you to the neighborhood." "I'm not in your neighborhood," I said, shaking her hand briefly. "My property line is about 50 feet that way." I pointed west, where a line of survey stakes with orange ribbons marked the boundary. Her smile never wavered. "Oh, of course. But we're all neighbors in the broader sense, aren't we? I actually wanted to talk to you about a wonderful opportunity for community building." I should have closed the door right then. Instead, I made the mistake of being polite. "What kind of opportunity?" "Well, our residents have expressed interest in having access to nature trails and outdoor recreational spaces. Your beautiful forest would be perfect for that. We were hoping you might consider allowing our homeowners to use some of your trails for hiking and bird watching. Of course, we would maintain everything and take full responsibility for any upkeep." "There are no trails on my property," I said, "and I'm not interested in having strangers wandering through my land. It's private property." Her smile finally cracked, just a bit. "I see. Well, that's disappointing. Many of our residents purchased their homes specifically because of the natural beauty of the area. They expected access to outdoor spaces." "Then they should have bought more than a quarter acre," I said. "I'm not running a public park here." She left after that, but I could tell from the look in her eyes that I had just made an enemy. In my experience, people like Brenda Carmichael don't take no for an answer. They just find different ways to ask the question. Over the next 2 months, I got several more visits from various HOA board members. There was Patricia, the vice president, who tried the sympathetic approach, talking about children who needed space to play. There was Gerald, the treasurer, who actually offered me money for an easement. I turned them all down. My property was not for sale, not for lease, and certainly not for their recreational use. Then, the letters started coming. First, it was a certified letter claiming that an old logging road running through my property was actually a public right-of-way. It wasn't. I had the deed, the survey, and documentation going back 100 years proving the entire property was private. I sent them a response with copies of my paperwork and told them to stop contacting me. The second letter claimed that I was violating some county ordinance about maintaining fire breaks, also false. I called the county fire marshal, who confirmed I was in full compliance with all regulations and seemed annoyed that someone was wasting his time with false reports. The third letter threatened legal action if I didn't allow them access for a land survey to determine historical boundaries. I forwarded that one to my attorney, a sharp woman named Linda, who had handled my grandfather's estate. She sent them a cease and desist letter that apparently got their attention because the letters stopped. For about 2 months, everything was quiet. I went about my life, working my remote IT job from home, taking walks through my forest, and enjoying the peace and solitude that had drawn me to this place. I should have known the silence was suspicious. It was early April when I decided to hike out to the western section of my property, an area I had not visited since before the snow started the previous November. The terrain there was rougher, with steep ravines and dense undergrowth, which meant I usually only made it out that way once or twice a year. As I pushed through a thick stand of evergreens, I heard something that made me stop in my tracks, the sound of construction equipment. I moved faster, following the sound, my heart pounding with a mixture of confusion and growing anger. When I finally broke through the tree line into a cleared area, I could not believe what I was seeing. There was a building under construction, not a shed, not a small cabin, a massive, luxurious lodge that looked like it belonged in a glossy vacation rental magazine. The structure was already mostly complete, with workers moving in and out, carrying materials and calling to each other over the noise of a generator. I stood there for a full minute, just staring, before I found my voice. What the hell's going on here? A man in a hard hat turned to look at me, his expression annoyed at the interruption. Construction site. You need to clear the area for safety reasons. This is my property, I said, walking forward. Who authorized this? His annoyed expression shifted to confusion. Your property. This is the Pine Summit Estates Community Lodge. The HOA contracted us for the build. The HOA has no authority here, I said, my voice rising. You're building on private property without permission. This is my land. The foreman pulled out a rolled set of plans and a permit document. Look, buddy, I don't know what your issue is, but we have all the proper permits and authorization. The HOA provided us with a survey showing this land is part of their common area. I looked at the documents he was showing me. Sure enough, there was a survey map, but it was completely fraudulent. The boundaries were drawn to make it look like this section of forest was part of the housing development. This is fake, I said. I'm telling you right now, you are trespassing and building without authorization. I'm calling the sheriff. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The foreman looked nervous now, talking into a radio, presumably calling his supervisor. Within minutes, several other people showed up, including a woman I recognized from the HOA. Trevor, there's obviously been some kind of misunderstanding, she said. Her name was Susan, I remembered, the HOA secretary. The only misunderstanding is yours, I said. You've built a structure on my private property without permission. That's called trespassing and illegal construction. We have documentation proving this is common area land, Susan insisted. Then your documentation is fraudulent. I have the deed to this property, filed with the county. Every inch of this land is mine. The sheriff's deputy arrived about 20 minutes later. His name was Martinez, and I had met him a few times at the local diner. He listened to both sides, looked at the documents Susan provided, and then asked me if I had my property paperwork. At my house, I said, about 2 miles east of here. Let's go take a look, Martinez said. We hiked back to my place, and I showed him my deed, my survey, and my property tax records. He compared them to the GPS coordinates he had taken at the construction site, then made several phone calls to the county assessor's office and the planning department. Mr. Xander, according to all the official records, you're correct. That construction site is on your private property. The survey the HOA provided appears to be falsified. So what happens now? I asked. I'm going to issue a stop work order at the site and start an investigation. This is going to involve the prosecutor's office because falsifying property documents is a serious crime. You'll probably want to talk to your attorney about civil action as well. We hiked back out to the construction site, where Martinez informed the foreman and the HOA representatives that all work must stop immediately. The foreman looked relieved, honestly. He packed up his crew and left. Susan and another HOA board member whose name I never caught tried to argue, but Martinez shut that down quickly. Madam, if you continue to protest, I'll be arresting you for trespassing right now. You've been informed this is private property. Leave immediately or you'll be leaving in handcuffs. They left, but not before Susan gave me a look that could have melted steel. Over the next few days, I met with Linda, my attorney, and we discussed my options. The lodge was about 70% complete. They had poured a foundation, erected the frame and walls, installed the roof, and put in windows. There was no electricity or plumbing yet, but the structure itself was substantial. You have several options, Linda explained. You can sue to have it removed and demolished, which would take time and they would likely fight it. You can sue for damages and force them to pay you the value of the land use and impact, or there's a more creative option. I'm listening, I said. The property is legally yours. That means the structure built on it is also legally yours. You could claim ownership of the building, let them finish it, and then do whatever you want with it. If they want to fight for ownership, they would have to prove they had legal right to build it in the first place, which they can't. I leaned back in my chair, a smile slowly spreading across my face. So you're saying I could just take their building? Essentially, yes. Any improvements made to your property become your property unless there was a legal agreement otherwise. Since they had no legal right to build there, you have every right to claim the structure. That's brilliant, I said. What's the catch? The catch is they will fight it. This will get ugly, and it will probably end up in court. But based on the law and the facts, you have a very strong case, almost unbeatable, actually. I thought about Brenda Carmichael's fake smile and all those threatening letters. I thought about them falsifying documents and building on my land without permission. Let's do it. And Linda, I want to file criminal complaints as well. They forged property documents and committed trespassing. That needs to have consequences. I'll coordinate with the prosecutor's office, Linda said. She sent a formal letter to the HOA the next day. The letter was beautiful in its simplicity. It stated that the structure built on my property was now legally mine, that any further trespass would result in criminal prosecution, and that I would be seeking damages for the unauthorized use of my land. It also informed them that criminal complaints had been filed with the prosecutor's office regarding the falsified property documents. The response came within 48 hours, hand-delivered by a process server. The HOA was suing me for access to their building and claiming that I was illegally restricting their property rights. The lawsuit was filed by a lawyer named Richard Pemberton, who had a reputation for taking aggressive stances and filing lots of motions. This is going to be expensive for them, Linda said when I showed her the lawsuit. Pemberton charges about $400 an hour, and this case is a loser for them. They're throwing good money after bad. Can they actually win? I asked. No, not unless they can somehow prove they had legal right to build on your property, which they cannot. The county records are clear. What they're hoping is that you'll get tired of the legal fight and offer them some kind of settlement. They want to pressure you into giving them something. Not happening, I said. The legal process moved slowly. We filed responses. They filed replies. There were discovery requests and depositions. I spent a frustrating day being questioned by Pemberton, who tried every angle to suggest that I had somehow known about the construction or given implicit permission. I had not, and the facts backed me up. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation was moving forward. Detective Sarah Chen from the county sheriff's office was handling the case. She interviewed me, the construction foreman, various HOA board members, and anyone else who might have relevant information. The falsified survey is the key piece of evidence, she explained during one of our meetings. We've traced it back to a document that Brenda Carmichael commissioned from a guy who isn't even a licensed surveyor. He's actually a graphic designer who did it as a favor because his wife is friends with Brenda. He's cooperating fully now that he realizes the legal trouble he's in. So what charges are we looking at? I asked. Forgery, fraud, criminal trespass, possibly conspiracy. The prosecutor is building a solid case. This should go to a grand jury within the next month or two. While the legal wheels turned, I made a decision. If this building was going to be mine, I wanted to see them finish it first. The structure was just sitting there, exposed to the weather, incomplete. Through Linda, I sent a message to the HOA. They could finish the construction, but only if they signed a document acknowledging that they were improving my property and had no ownership claim to the structure. If they refused, I would have the partially completed building demolished and sue them for the cost of removal and land restoration. It was a calculated move. They had already invested probably $200,000 into this project. Walking away and watching it be demolished would be a bitter pill, but signing away their claim would be admitting defeat. They took 3 weeks to respond, and during that time I learned from Detective Chen that there was serious conflict within the HOA board. Apparently, not everyone had been aware of the full extent of Brenda's plans. Several board members were resigning, and there were rumors of internal lawsuits between HOA members. Finally, they agreed to my terms. They would finish the building in exchange for me dropping the civil lawsuit for monetary damages. They had to sign a document releasing all claims to the structure and acknowledging it was built on my property without authorization. Linda made sure the document was ironclad. The construction resumed in late May. I hiked out there every few days to watch the progress. They were not cutting any corners. The lodge was being finished with high-end materials and craftsmanship: hardwood floors, granite counters, stainless steel appliances, custom cabinetry, and designer furniture. There was a full kitchen, 2 bathrooms, a master bedroom, a loft sleeping area, and a great room with that massive stone fireplace. The deck was built from composite materials and wrapped around 3 sides of the structure. I overheard one of the workers talking about the budget. They're putting another $150 grand into finishing this place. Must be nice to have that kind of money to burn. By mid-July, the lodge was complete. It was absolutely stunning. The interior designer they hired had gone with a modern rustic theme, all natural woods and stone with pops of color from the furniture and artwork. There was a hot tub on the back deck. The kitchen was stocked with dishes, cookware, and even a fancy espresso machine. The bedrooms had luxury linens. There was a wine rack with about 30 bottles of wine. The place looked like something from a vacation rental site that would go for $500 a night. The HOA held a final walkthrough with their contractor and designer, making sure everything was perfect. I watched from a distance, hidden in the tree line. Brenda Carmichael was there, and even from 100 yards away, I could see the tension in her shoulders. This had to be killing her. Once they signed off and the contractor handed over the final documentation, I waited exactly 1 day. Then I called Detective Chen. "The building is finished and furnished," I said. "What's the status of the criminal case?" "We're ready to move forward with arrests," she said. "The prosecutor has approval from the grand jury for multiple charges. We were actually waiting to see how this played out with the building." "I think it's played out far enough," I said. "I'd like to take possession of my property." "Give me 2 days to coordinate with the prosecutor's office," she said. Those 2 days felt like 2 weeks. I spent the time documenting everything, taking photos and videos of the completed lodge, making sure I had a clear record of the finished state. Linda drew up a formal notice that I would be taking possession of the structure and that any further trespass by HOA members would be prosecuted. On a sunny Thursday morning in late July, I met Detective Chen and Deputy Martinez at my house. There were also 2 other deputies I did not recognize, and a prosecutor named James Walsh. "We have arrest warrants for Brenda Carmichael, Patricia Delgado, and Gerald Thornton," Walsh explained. "Those are the 3 board members who were directly involved in the falsified survey and the unauthorized construction. We also have warrants for 2 other individuals who assisted. The charges include felony forgery, fraud, and criminal trespass." "What kind of penalties are we looking at?" I asked. "Forgery and fraud are Class B felonies in Washington. They could face up to 10 years in prison and $10,000 fines for each count. Realistically, if convicted, they'll probably get a mix of prison time, suspended sentences, probation, and restitution. But this is serious. They committed serious crimes." We drove out to the Pine Summit Estates development in a convoy of vehicles. Several of the HOA board members lived right there in the community, which made serving the warrants convenient. I stayed in my truck while the deputies and detective knocked on doors and made arrests. Brenda Carmichael's arrest was particularly satisfying to watch, though I felt a little guilty about that. She came to the door in her yoga pants and a tank top, coffee mug in hand, probably ready to start another day of making people's lives miserable. When Detective Chen showed her the warrant and informed her she was under arrest, the color drained from her face. She tried to argue, tried to call her lawyer, but Chen was professional and firm. The handcuffs went on, and Brenda was placed in the back of a patrol car. Patricia Delgado cried through her entire arrest. Gerald Thornton tried to run, which was stupid. because he was 63 years old and overweight, and Deputy Martinez caught him before he made it to the end of his driveway. By noon, all 5 individuals named in the warrants were in custody. Walsh gave a statement to a local news crew that had shown up after hearing chatter on the police scanner. The story was going to be everywhere by evening. "Now comes the fun part," Linda said when I called her with an update. "You get to enjoy your new luxury lodge, and they get to explain to a judge why they thought forging documents and building on someone else's property was a good idea." I drove out to the lodge that afternoon with a bottle of champagne and a sense of profound satisfaction. I unlocked the door with the key the contractor had provided and stepped inside. The place smelled like new construction and fresh paint. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows, illuminating the dust motes in the air. I walked through each room, running my hands over the smooth granite counters, testing the comfortable furniture, checking out the well-stocked kitchen. They had even left the wine. I opened a bottle of Cabernet, poured myself a glass, and walked out onto the deck. The view was spectacular, looking out over the untouched forest, the trees stretching as far as I could see. My phone rang. It was a reporter from the local newspaper, asking for a comment on the arrests. I declined politely. Then it was a TV station, then another newspaper. I ended up turning my phone off. Over the next few weeks, the story blew up locally and even got picked up by some national news outlets. HOA builds luxury lodge on man's property without permission was the headline that seemed to capture people's imagination. I got interview requests from everyone from local news to national morning shows. I turned them all down except for one interview with a local paper, where I simply stated the facts and said I hoped this would serve as a warning about HOA overreach. The criminal cases moved forward. Brenda, Patricia, and Gerald all hired lawyers, expensive ones, which meant they were liquidating assets to pay for their defense. The other 2 defendants took plea deals early, agreeing to testify against the board members in exchange for reduced charges. The HOA itself was in chaos. The remaining board members resigned en masse. The homeowners in Pine Summit Estates were furious because their HOA fees had been used to fund this illegal project, and now they were facing potential liability. There were threats of lawsuits between the homeowners and the former board members. The whole thing was a spectacular mess. Linda filed a civil action on my behalf against the HOA for damages related to the unauthorized land use, even though they had finished the building. "You still suffered damages," she explained. "They used your land without permission for months, impacted the environment, and caused you emotional distress and legal expenses. They owe you money beyond just finishing the building." That lawsuit was settled in September. The HOA's insurance company, after reviewing the case and realizing they were on the hook for a massive judgment if it went to trial, offered a settlement of $75,000. Linda advised me to take it. The money covered my legal fees and gave me a nice cushion besides. The criminal trials happened in November and December. I had to testify in each one, describing how I had discovered the construction, my conversations with the defendants, and the impact on my property. The prosecution had a mountain of evidence: the falsified survey, emails between board members discussing the project, testimony from the graphic designer who created the fake documents, and testimony from the construction foreman who explained how he was told the land belonged to the HOA. Brenda Carmichael fought the hardest, maintaining through her lawyer that she had genuinely believed they had legal right to the land. The jury did not buy it. She was convicted on all counts: forgery, fraud, and criminal trespass. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation, and ordered her to pay restitution of $50,000 to me for the land use and impact. Patricia Delgado was convicted, but received a more lenient sentence because she cooperated partially and showed genuine remorse. She got 6 months in prison, 2 years probation, and $20,000 in restitution. Gerald Thornton, who had tried to run during his arrest and had been belligerent through the entire process, got 2 years in prison, 3 years probation, and was ordered to pay $30,000 in restitution. The financial impact on these people was devastating. Between legal fees, fines, and restitution, each of them was out well over $100,000. Their lives were essentially ruined over a vanity project and their refusal to accept that they could not have access to my property. As for me, I ended up with a luxury lodge worth about $350,000, plus settlement money and restitution that totaled about $175,000. More importantly, I had clear boundaries and no more HOA harassment. I used the lodge as a weekend retreat for a while, inviting friends up for hiking and relaxation. Eventually, I decided to list it as a vacation rental. The income from that has been substantial, about $4,000 a month after expenses. It paid for itself, and then some. The Pine Summit Estates development never quite recovered its reputation. Property values dropped when the news coverage highlighted the HOA disaster. Several homeowners sold at a loss and moved away. A new board was eventually elected, and they were extremely careful to respect property boundaries and follow all regulations. They sent me a formal apology letter, which I appreciated, though it did not come from any of the people who had been involved in the original scheme. I ran into Susan, the former HOA secretary, at the grocery store about a year after everything concluded. She had not been charged criminally because she had not been directly involved in creating the fake survey, though she had known about the project. She looked tired and older than I remembered. "Trevor, I want to apologize," she said. "I should have questioned what Brenda was doing. I knew it seemed wrong, but I did not push back hard enough. A lot of people got hurt because we did not stand up to her." "I appreciate that," I said. "Why did you go along with it?" She sighed. Brenda was very persuasive. She sold it as this great amenity for the community, said she had verified the property boundaries, made it all sound legitimate. By the time I realized she had cut corners and falsified documents, we were already in too deep. I was a coward for not speaking up. "At least you recognize that now," I said. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you got your property back and that they finished the lodge. It's beautiful. I've seen the rental listing online. You deserve to benefit from it after what they put you through." We parted on surprisingly good terms. I did not forgive her for her role in the situation, but I understood that Brenda had been the driving force and others had been swept along. The years since have been peaceful. My property remains undeveloped except for the lodge, which continues to generate good income as a vacation rental. I've had guests from all over the country stay there, many of them attracted by the story behind it. I always include a brief history in the rental description, a cautionary tale about HOA, overreach, and property rights. I expanded my own house and built a proper home office for my IT work. The rental income from the lodge allowed me to reduce my work hours and spend more time hiking my property and maintaining the forest. I've marked all the trails properly now, not for public use, but for my own enjoyment, and for the occasional guided hikes I give to small groups interested in forest ecology. Brenda Carmichael was released from prison after serving 14 months with good behavior. I heard through local gossip that she moved to Arizona to live with her daughter. Patricia Delgado served her full 6 months and now works as a cashier at a hardware store. Gerald Thornton served 18 months and came out bitter and broke. His wife divorced him while he was inside, and he lost his house in the settlement. The Pine Summit Estates development slowly stabilized under competent leadership. The new HOA board ran the community properly, focusing on maintaining common areas within their actual boundaries and not harassing neighbors. They even invited me to a community barbecue once, which I politely declined. I had no interest in socializing with that group, even though the troublemakers were gone. Detective Chen stopped by my house one afternoon in the spring, 2 years after the arrests. She was following up on some paperwork related to the restitution payments and wanted to make sure I was receiving them properly. "You know, that case was one of the most satisfying of my career," she said as we sat on my porch with coffee. "Usually property crimes are messy and the victims don't get much justice. This one was clear-cut, and you got everything you deserved. Plus, those HOA people learned a very expensive lesson about respecting property rights." "Do you think they actually learned anything?" I asked. She considered that. "Brenda? Probably not. People like her never really change. They just get more careful or find new victims. But Patricia seemed genuinely remorseful, and I think she'll never do anything like that again. Gerald is just angry at the world. As for the broader community, yeah, I think there was a lesson there. The story got enough coverage that HOAs around here are being more careful. We've actually seen a drop in property dispute calls." "Then something good came out of it," I said. "More than something. You got a $300,000 building out of it," I laughed. "There is that." The legal settlements and restitution payments came in over time. Some of it was in lump sums, some in payment plans. I put most of it into investments and property improvements. I had the main access road to my property properly graded and graveled. I installed a better security system. I even bought a used ATV for getting around the property more easily. One of the unexpected benefits of the whole situation was the clarity it brought to property rights in the area. Linda told me that my case was being cited in legal briefs and used as a teaching example in property law classes at the University of Washington. The principle that improvements made on someone else's property without permission become the property owner's asset was well established, but rarely demonstrated so dramatically. "You're kind of famous in property law circles," Linda told me with a grin. "The case of Xander versus Pine Summit Estates HOA is now a thing." "Wonderful," I said dryly. "That's exactly what I always wanted." But honestly, there was a satisfaction in knowing that my experience might help others protect their property rights. I'd received emails from people around the country who were dealing with HOA disputes or property encroachment issues, asking for advice. I always directed them to qualified attorneys in their areas, but it felt good to know that my story was helping people understand their rights. The lodge itself became a point of pride. I personally managed the vacation rental, screening guests carefully and maintaining the property to high standards. Reviews were consistently excellent, with guests praising the luxury amenities, the beautiful location, and the fascinating backstory. Some guests even asked if they could meet me and hear the story firsthand. I usually declined, but occasionally I would stop by if someone seemed particularly interested in the property law aspects or the forest ecology. One couple who stayed at the lodge were themselves dealing with an HOA problem back in Oregon. They had booked the lodge specifically because of the story and wanted to ask me questions about how I had handled things. "The key is documentation," I told them as we sat on the lodge deck, looking out over the forest. I had every piece of paperwork related to my property ownership. I had surveys, deeds, tax records, everything. When they tried to claim the land was theirs, I could prove immediately that it wasn't. If you're dealing with an HOA dispute, document everything, every conversation, every letter, every interaction, and get a good attorney early before things escalate. "We've been trying to handle it ourselves to save money," the husband said. "That's a mistake," I said. "An attorney costs money up front, but saves you much more in the long run. My attorney, Linda, was worth every penny. She knew the law, she was aggressive when needed, and she protected my interests. Without her, this could have dragged on for years." They thanked me for the advice and left me a glowing review. A few months later, they sent me an email saying they had hired an attorney and successfully resolved their HOA dispute. It felt good to know I had helped. As time passed, the story became part of local lore. The HOA Lodge was what people called it, even though it was properly my lodge now. When people asked me to tell the story, I usually kept it brief, hitting the highlights. They built on my land without permission. I claimed the building, they had to finish it, and they went to jail for fraud. The details were more complex, but that was the essence of it. I never regretted how I handled the situation. Some people asked if I felt bad about the criminal prosecution, if I thought jail time was too harsh. My answer was always the same. They committed crimes, serious crimes involving forgery and fraud. Actions have consequences. If I had let it slide, they would have just done it to someone else. The punishment fit the crime. The forest around the lodge remained pristine. I made sure that the path leading to it was the only real disruption to the natural environment. I worked with a conservation group to put most of my property into a conservation easement, which meant it could never be developed. The lodge was grandfathered in as an existing structure, but nothing new could be built. When I eventually pass away, the property will be managed by a land trust to preserve it in perpetuity. My grandfather would have loved how things turned out. He had always been protective of the land, had always said it was meant to be wild and free. The fact that I had defended it against people who wanted to exploit it for their own purposes would have made him proud. And the fact that their own arrogance and illegal actions had resulted in creating something beautiful that now funded the property's conservation would have made him laugh. One autumn evening, about 3 years after the lodge was completed, I sat on the deck with a glass of wine and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The forest was quiet except for the wind in the trees and the occasional call of an owl. The lodge glowed warmly behind me, lights reflecting off the polished wood floors and granite counters. I thought about the journey that had led to this moment. The shock of discovering the construction, the anger at the violation of my property, the satisfaction of turning the situation to my advantage, the justice of seeing the criminals prosecuted. And finally, the peace of knowing my land was protected and the lodge was generating income that supported that protection. It had been a fight, and there had been times when the stress felt overwhelming, when I wondered if it was worth the trouble. But sitting there, looking out over 200 acres of pristine forest, enjoying a luxury lodge that I had gained through the stupidity and arrogance of others, I knew every moment of the fight had been worth it. The HOA had thought they could bully me, could take what was mine, could forge documents and build whatever they wanted. They had been wrong, and their wrongness had cost them dearly while benefiting me in ways they never could have imagined. That's the thing about property rights in America. They're fundamental. They're protected by law. And when someone violates them as egregiously as the Pine Summit Estates HOA violated mine, the legal system has teeth. Sharp teeth. Teeth that bite hard and leave permanent scars. As the stars came out and the forest settled into its nighttime rhythms, I raised my glass in a silent toast. To property rights, to justice, to the law working as it should, and to luxury lodges built by people stupid enough to construct them on someone else's land. The wind picked up, rustling through the Douglas firs and western red cedars, the same trees that had witnessed everything. They had been here long before the HOA, before the development, before any of this trouble started. And they would be here long after, standing tall and strong, protecting the land my grandfather loved and I had defended. Inside the lodge, the fire in the stone fireplace crackled and popped. The kitchen lights gleamed off the stainless steel appliances the HOA had installed. The comfortable furniture invited relaxation. Every element of luxury they had put into this building was now mine, a permanent reminder that sometimes karma works exactly as it should. I finished my wine and stood, stretching. And tomorrow, I had guests checking in. A family from California who wanted to experience the Washington wilderness. They had specifically requested to hear the story of the lodge, and I had agreed to stop by and tell them about it. It never got old, watching people's faces as I described how an HOA built a luxury lodge on my timberland without permission, and how I let them furnish it completely before I brought the sheriff to arrest them and claimed it all as mine. It was, as they say, a hell of a story. And the best part? Every word of it was true. The lesson for anyone dealing with an HOA or any kind of property dispute is simple. Know your rights, document everything, get good legal representation, and never back down when you're in the right. The law is on the side of property owners when those rights are clear and violations are obvious. It might take time, it might cost money up front, and it might be stressful, but justice is possible. In my case, justice came with floor-to-ceiling windows, a stone fireplace, a hot tub, and a view that money couldn't buy. Not a bad outcome for standing up for what was rightfully mine. As I locked up the lodge and hiked back to my own house through the darkening forest, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My property was secure. The people who had violated it had faced consequences, and I had gained something valuable from their mistake. The path home was familiar, even in the dark. I knew every root and rock, every turn and rise. This land was part of me now, in a way it hadn't been before the conflict. Defending it had forged a deeper connection, had made me truly understand what my grandfather had felt about this place. Back at my house, I made dinner and settled in for the evening. My phone had several messages from the rental management platform, guests asking questions about the lodge and new booking requests. Business was good. The lodge was booked solid through the holidays and well into the next spring. I responded to the messages, confirmed bookings, and answered questions about amenities and access. It was routine work now, managing the rental, but I never forgot how extraordinary the situation was that had created this opportunity. Before bed, I pulled up the property records on my computer, something I did periodically just to confirm everything was still properly documented. My name on the deed, the survey clearly showing my boundaries, the tax records current and paid. Everything in order, everything legal, everything mine. I also checked the status of the restitution payments. They were coming in on schedule from Brenda, Patricia, and Gerald. The courts had set up payment plans that would continue for years, a constant reminder to them of the cost of their crime. Sleep came easily that night, as it usually did. I had no guilt, no regrets, no anxiety about the situation. I had defended what was mine, had used the legal system properly, and had come out ahead. Sometimes life worked out exactly right. The story of the HOA lodge became a permanent part of my life and my property's history. It was a cautionary tale, a legal precedent, and a personal victory all rolled into one. And every time I walked through that beautiful building, seeing the high-end finishes and luxury details they had installed, I felt a profound satisfaction. They had tried to take from me. Instead, they had given me something valuable, gone to prison for their crimes, and paid me restitution on top of it. It was, by any measure, a comprehensive and total victory. And so the lodge stands deep in the Washington forest, a testament to property rights, legal consequences, and the spectacular backfire of HOA overreach. Guests continue to book it, drawn by the luxury, the location, and the infamous story. The forest continues to grow and thrive, protected now by conservation easement, and I continue to live peacefully on my land, secure in the knowledge that it's mine, every acre, every tree, and every structure built upon it, regardless of who did the building. That's the whole story, from discovery to arrests to final resolution. A story of trespass and construction, of fraudulent documents and criminal charges, of civil lawsuits and settlements, and ultimately of justice served and property rights defended. It's a story I'll tell for the rest of my life, and it's a story that, I hope, will help others understand the importance of standing up for what's legally and rightfully yours. The HOA thought they could build a luxury lodge on my timberland and get away with it. They were wrong. And now, every night that lodge sits on my property, generating income and providing enjoyment for guests, it serves as a permanent reminder of that wrongness and the consequences that followed. Justice, in this case, came with granite countertops and a view of the forest. And I wouldn't have it any other way.